Bear with me here though. I will be eating a banana while talking about a sapphic book. This feels wrong, but I am hungry, so it must be done. Do not watch me eat it, online perverts. I have literally rolled out of bed this morning and made a bad attempt at doing an accent, so I'll stop it here. But yes, I have literally rolled out of bed this morning to film a video and tell you the top 7 best books I read in 2022. And I will complete this with a nutritious breakfast of orange juice and a banana that I took from the hotel lobby. These were just books that I happened to have read in 2022, though many of them were released this year. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that you'll like them. It just means that these were books that I rated 5 stars because it hit me at the right time, at the right place. But I will be reading out loud a quote from each book to give you an idea of the writing. And if you want to check out other books that are really good, I think you'll also love Book of the Month, which is the sponsor of today's video. They're super popular and fast-growing online service for readers, and their mission is to promote new and emerging authors for you to discover new books to enjoy. So every month they go through hundreds of book titles and choose 5 to 7 for you to pick from to be delivered to your door. It's totally risk-free, so you can skip any month, anytime, and you will not be charged. This month I chose 2 books from them, and that is Babel, which is a very highly anticipated and popular dark academia book by the author of The Poppy War. And then the second book that I got was Kiss Her Once for Me. This is a romantic comedy about a woman who fakes an engagement with her landlord, but then she ends up falling for his sister. That was the hook that got me there. We love a sapphic romance during the holiday season. So if you're interested in those books or any of the other selections that they've picked, they have a fantastic deal going on where you can get your first box for $5 if you live in the US. All you have to do is click on the link in my description below and use the code Now let's dive into my personal top books of this year. I'm gonna go through this list in chronological order from when I read them throughout the year, which means that the first book is gonna be House of Hollow. I always have such low expectations when it comes to young adult contemporary books because I usually do not read in that genre or demographic. But this feels so different because even though it does take place in modern day, it feels more like a dark, twisty little fairy tale that just happens to take place in modern day. It follows 3 sisters who experienced something really strange when they were younger. Their parents took them on a vacation in Scotland, and when they were out in this suburban street, they mysteriously disappeared in the middle of the night. Nobody knows what happened. It's like they just vanished out of thin air. And then they came back a month later, just appeared all of a sudden. Nobody knows how the hell they appeared again, but they have no memory of what happened to them. And ever since they returned, weird shit has just been following them wherever they go. Even the sisters themselves are turning outwardly strange as well. So they originally had dark hair, but then their hair turns white. They originally had blue eyes. Those eyes turn black. They cannot stop eating, but they never gain any weight. They are living every goth Tumblr girly's dream right now, and other people feel weirdly drawn to them. There's something like intoxicating about their presence. They seem so otherworldly beautiful, but then there's this sense of danger with them as well. The book takes place 10 years later. The youngest child is now 17 years old. By this point, her 2 older sisters have pretty much just traveled the world. One of them is like this punk bitch, and then the other is this very fancy, high fashion, bougie bitch. And the plot begins when that older sister, the fashion bitch, goes missing, and she left behind really bizarre clues. Now the main character and the other sister have to figure out what happened to her, have to trace her steps. They go through some supernatural encounters, but then along the way, they really start to figure out what the hell happened to them 10 years ago. This book was so addicting to read. I read it in 2 days. I loved the writing. It was so descriptive and atmospheric. She really pinned down an aesthetic and she went all the way with it. There's this horror element, but then there's so much femininity along with it, and it's such like a cool surrealistic combination. It is both grotesque and aesthetically pleasing. I love how disturbingly strange this is. I love that these bitches are just vomiting flowers and nobody knows why. As a writer, this book really encouraged me to lean into the aesthetics of writing. If it's creepy, go all the way. If something can be strange, make it so fucking strange. But it was still contained as well. Like, it didn't go so far off the rails that you're losing the plot. There was still a very cohesive plot going on. I absolutely loved it, and it's still one of those books where when people ask me for recommendations and they are looking for young adults specifically, that is one of my go-tos. This is one of my favorite quotes from the book. Why are you so beautiful, do you think? So hungry, so able to bend the wills of those around you. You are like the deaf flowers that grow rampant in your wake, lovely to look at, intoxicating even, but get too close and you will soon learn that there is something rank beneath. That's what beauty often is in nature, a warning, a disguise. We love these creepy little bitches, so if you check out the book, I hope you love it too. The next book that I thought was fantastic is Notes on Execution. This is a literary novel about a serial killer who is on death row. Most of the story is actually told through 3 perspectives of the women who were affected by him in some way. So the first one is his mother. The second is one of his peers when he grew up in the foster system, and she would later grow up to be the policeman who actually found him to be the serial killer. And then the third perspective is one of the victim's sisters. There were so many interesting themes that this book explored, like how a lot of times when terrible things happen, people try to find some kind of meaning in the psyche of these men. Like, they try to think, oh, what were these men thinking? Is there any rhyme or reason to it? There's another interesting theme about whether this is nature or nurture. I came into this book very curious whether the author was going to try to make us sympathize with him or not. Because as I kept reading, I was like, I don't sympathize for this mofo at all. I was, however, very engaged because the writing was fantastic. Because she would ask the readers questions like whether redemption is possible for people who do terrible things. And I really appreciated that the author didn't steer us into believing one way or the other. Because one of my pet peeves is when an author spoon feeds you what they want you to think. It really just makes you question and walk away with your own conclusions and make your own judgments. This is such a good book to read as like a discussion for a book club, because even after I was done with this book, I was talking about it for like an hour with my partner who had not read the book, but there were just so many interesting questions to contemplate that I wanted to rope her into this and see what she thought of it. There's this question of redemption and rehabilitation. That's what makes the fact that we get different viewpoints of these women so effective, because on one hand, you might get a viewpoint where maybe in another life, if he were born in better circumstances, he could have been better. But then another viewpoint is there's no point in looking at these other alternate universes, because the fact of the matter is you were born here, therefore you are responsible for the choices that you make. What's the point of looking at what could have been and ignoring taking any accountability for what you are experiencing right now? That's the viewpoint that I am leaning towards, but I think it's such a fascinating book to talk about, and the prose is amazing. So let me read to you one of the quotes. This is from the perspective of the victim's sister. Grief was a hole, a portal to nothing. Grief was a walk so long, Hazel forgot her own legs. It was a shock of blinding sun, a burst of remembering, sandals on pavement, a sleepy back seat, nails painted on the bathroom floor. Grief was a loneliness that felt like a planet. I am such a sucker for metaphors, and this author went all the way with it. On a lighter note, the next book that I rated 5 stars was Book Lovers. This is a book that would go really well with someone who has been watching a lot of Hallmark movies now that the holiday season is coming, because this book subverts a lot of tropes that you see in Hallmark movies. The main character is a cutthroat literary agent, and she follows the archetype of that cold businesswoman who goes to a small town for Christmas. That's literally the plot, because her sister drags her to this small town because she wants to have a little vacation. And when they are there, she meets the main guy of the story, but instead of him being one of the rugged countrymen or a farmer or whatever the fuck kind of guy you meet in those small towns, he actually happens to be one of her rival colleagues. He's another literary agent. He's another businessman, very no nonsense. The subversion that I think was the most valuable in this book was actually the fact that the girl boss protagonist was not expected to change, because that's what happens anytime you read or watch these kinds of stories. They're supposed to go to the small town and change in some kind of way where they realize they don't want to work at their jobs anymore, they just want to live the simple life in the small town. But she was never treated like that. She wasn't expected to change her ways or her mentality. Instead, she is appreciated for who she is and what she values, especially by the love interest. I like that this woman who is very career oriented, she values independence, she's not interested in having children, she wants to stay in the city forever. These are qualities that aren't villainized or expected to change. There's no moral judgment with them. It's just simply how people prefer their lives to be. It kind of became more than just a romance. It focused a lot more on the main character's family struggles and her interpersonal stuff going on. So maybe if you were looking more for a romance, you might be a little bit disappointed by this book, but I felt like the interpersonal struggles that the main character had helped round the book out more. Also, what's very notorious when it comes to romance books is the third act conflict, where the couple has to break up by the third act because of some misunderstanding. And I love the way that this book tackled the inevitable third act. The conflict was so realistic and honest. Like, I was reading this shit and I was like, damn bitch, I don't know what to do in your shoes. There wasn't just one conflict, there were multiple realistic conflicts. Once it rained, it fucking stormed for the bitch. She had to fucking work for her happy ending. I did notice a lot of info dumps throughout the book though, because the author would try really hard to build up the relationship or further develop the character. And what better way to do that than just to do a long info dump where they share their own personal experiences to each other in order to strengthen their relationship. Like, I could very clearly tell what she was doing and it didn't feel quite as natural, but I still felt okay with letting those things slide. I think the book had way more positives going on than negatives. Here's one of the quotes that I highlighted. Maybe love shouldn't be built on a foundation of compromises, but maybe it can't exist without them either. Not the kind that forces two people into shapes they don't fit in, but the kind that loosens their grips, always leaves room to grow. Compromises that say, there will be a U-shaped space in my heart, and if your shape changes, I will adapt. No matter where we go, our love will stretch out to hold us, and that makes me feel like everything will be okay. Every book she does, there's always a long, emotionally wrought monologue that she delivers near the climax, and it delivers every time. Speaking of delivering quality, the next book on my list is Our Wives Under the Sea. This is a literary novel with some elements of horror. It's very short, basically about novella length, and it is about a woman who is dealing with a wife who had returned from this expedition under the sea. She and a couple crew members went on a submarine to go below the seafloor, and they were supposed to do some research to discover what mysterious things were out in the ocean. But then the submarine ends up losing power and they disappear into the sea. They get stranded from everyone else. They don't have any communication with the others, and they are trapped there for, I don't remember how long. I would guess maybe 6 months. It was like a long time. I don't know how the fuck I would have survived. So there's two timelines going on. You get present day, which is from the main character's perspective, grappling with the return of her wife, who had finally surfaced after the expedition, but she has not been the same since then. She's been barely eating. She has been just staying in the bathtub the whole time, turning on the water, letting it overflow the bathroom, raising up the water bills. She's very lost in her thoughts. She's disconnected from the main character. And then the other alternate perspective that you get is from the wife's perspective when she was on that expedition many months ago, and you find out little bits and pieces from when they went down below. The main story though is in present day. There's not much going on, but that's literary novels for you. Bear with me here though. I will be eating a banana while talking about a sapphic book. This feels wrong, but I am hungry, so it must be done. Do not watch me eat it, online perverts. This book is gonna be a hit or miss for people, and for many people, it's gonna be a miss. There was even someone I saw who read the book after they saw that I rated it highly, and they ended up rating it 0 out of 5 stars. Maybe if I had read it any other time, I wouldn't be into it, but somehow, some way, the universe just aligned itself and it just clicked with me. It is so slow, it has very long paragraphs, and yet I was immersed the whole time. I thought the writing was beautiful. There were themes of grief and sapphic love that I felt so tenderly about, and it felt so melancholic. It was a bunch of sad lesbians. I mean, what more could I want? I think a lot of times I can tell when an author is trying really hard to be as descriptive as possible, but with this book, the writing just flowed so naturally. I was very impressed. It was like the author's skill was innate and natural within her, that she didn't even have to like try super hard to do it. And that is so hard to pull off. Here's one of the quotes that I highlighted. This is a line of dialogue from a character who had lost her sister during that exhibition. I think that the thing about losing someone isn't the loss, but the absence of afterwards, the endlessness of that. My friends were sad, people who knew my sister were sad, but everyone moves on after a month. It's all they can manage. It doesn't mean they weren't sad, just that things keep going or something. It's hard when you look up and realize that everyone's moved off and left you in that place by yourself. Like they've all gone on and you're there still, holding on to this person you're supposed to let go of. Speaking of the complexities of grief, the next book on my list is I'm Glad My Mom Died. This is a memoir written by Jennette McCurdy, who was a former child actor. She was forced into becoming an actress because her mother pressured into it, and along with that, she also was pressured into having an eating disorder. She ended up developing issues with addiction, and in general, the whole book is about her complicated relationship with her mother, who was very overbearing. What makes it more complicated though is that her mom ended up dying when she was younger. I think around 20 or 21, her mom died of cancer. It was complicated because her mom was basically all that she knew in her life, but because her mom died, that was when she was able to finally be free and be able to live her own life. She was able to realize how much of a grip her mom had. I never grew up watching Nickelodeon, so I never watched anything with Jennette McCurdy, but I was still very engrossed reading her story. It's very obvious that she is more into writing than into acting. The writing in her memoir was in a different level than the writing in other celebrity memoirs that I've read, because she recounts all the events in her life with so much detail, and she's able to tell them chronologically. She's able to tell everything that went on in her head during that time, which I'm impressed by because I literally could not tell you anything about my childhood. The way that she frames the story as well, I felt like that was the mark of a skilled writer. She's able to write it in such a way that she hits the emotional beats that she wants you to feel along with her. And I also appreciated how she was just so honest about how negative and bitter that she is. I appreciate that as a bitter and negative bitch myself, and it was actually kind of eye-opening to see the similar qualities of myself in her, where she's very irritable, she's very cynical. The way that she would write her line of thinking with the constant self-criticism was so much like the way that I have talked to myself. That just made me realize and self-reflect a lot. Even though our circumstances were so different, the way that our mentalities worked were similar, and it kind of made me feel better that I'm not the only one who processes life this way. And I think I try so hard to be more positive, and to see her just go ahead and admit that she fucking hates the cards that she's been dealt with, it makes me feel more validated. So here are some of the quotes that I'm talking about. I'm becoming an angry person with no tolerance for anyone. I'm aware of this shift and yet have no desire to change it. If anything, I want it. It's armor. It's easier to be angry than to feel the pain underneath it. Period. She knows how it goes. She wanted this, and I wanted her to have it. I wanted her to be happy. But now that I have it, I realize that she's happy and I'm not. Her happiness came at the cost of mine. I feel robbed and exploited. This book did a really good job of having simplistic writing, but still conveying the complexities of dysfunction. I did see that she signed a deal to write even more books. Some of them are fiction as well, and I am very much looking forward to reading her future work. On a more positive note, the next book on my list is How to Keep House While Drowning. This is a very short self-help book that came for my neck. Self-help books are notorious for not being actually that helpful, but I will say this is a very helpful book in the sense that it has made me question my relationship with productivity. The book is specifically talking about cleaning and organizing around your space, but I feel like it was so much more than that, because it was more so sharing these life principles that are supposed to revolutionize how you approach home care, but it made me rethink how I approach productivity in general. What I loved about about this book was that the voice was so compassionate for you. She addresses how a lot of people feel shame and anxiety over home care. She talks about how a lot of times we cast moral judgments on the cleanliness of our space. If our space isn't clean, that means we're lazy. That means we don't have our shit together and we're failing somehow. And instead, she encourages you to shift your perspective into less of a moral viewpoint and more of a functional viewpoint. That doesn't necessarily mean it has to look super clean and tidy. It just needs to be functional to work for you. She talks about how to give yourself permission to rest even when things aren't finished, and how to motivate yourself to care for your space. I didn't use this book as a guide to clean up my space because I haven't lived anywhere permanently in a while. I've been constantly moving, but I kind of felt like it was a good therapy book for me, especially when it pointed out that I view rest as a reward. It literally said that I was a reader who was probably struggling with the idea of rest. And even when I am resting, I feel restless because I keep on thinking about all the things that I could be doing instead. And that was me to a fucking T. It truly made me evaluate my relationship with productivity because I put so much of my worth into it. Like if I'm not productive, then I feel like a piece of shit. And it made me realize that I burn out a lot. Like something that I would do a lot is just sleep constantly for like 16 hours, 18 hours, like on a weekend or something. I would feel so bad about it instead of realizing there's probably something going on with my life and with my body to the point where my body felt like it needed to shut me down for that long. I was burning myself out, and in return, my body was sleeping excessively just to try to recover. And as someone who is very self-critical, I felt like the compassion that the author extended in the book was very helpful for me in my healing. So let me read to you one of the quotes. "You are not required to contribute to be worthy of love and care and belonging. We know this is true because you could be connected to a ventilator, unable to contribute anything, and in fact be using lots of resources and still be a worthy human being. We all have seasons of life when we are capable of contributing more or less than the people around us." And then finally, the last book that is on my list is the book that actually is gonna be my top book of all time, and it is the book that made me cry on the subway. It is called What My Bones Know. It is a book that I have not talked about in a wrap-up video yet because I read it more recently. It is a memoir written by a journalist who was diagnosed with complex PTSD. This is a form of PTSD that is a little bit different from the regular one that we know, because rather than just one event that has created your PTSD, it is a series of traumatic events happening over and over and over again over the course of years. In the author's case, this was the result of being abused by her parents over and over. And it's actually quite heavy and rough to get through when you first start. But when you look at her in present day, by age 30, she seems to be a person who's very successful. She has this dream job of being an award-winning radio producer. She has a loving boyfriend. She is financially well off. But behind the scenes, she's having constant panic attacks. She's sobbing at her desk. With her diagnosis of complex PTSD, that starts to add a lot more context for why she is the way that she is. But there's not that much research with that form of PTSD in general. So she uses her experience with journalism to actually try to investigate further into it. So she interviews scientists and psychologists. She goes through so many different forms of therapy to try to help herself out. She returns to her hometown in San Jose to try to figure out the effects of immigrant trauma. She visits the country of her birth in Malaysia to talk to her family and figure out more about the cultural approach to the way that people deal with their problems, which a lot of times older Asians do not even acknowledge that there's a problem. But like, why did they do that? So she just goes down so many rabbit holes to try to figure out how to deal with this darkness that she has. This was her way of reclaiming agency from her trauma. This book came from my fucking neck. This book hit me so hard, and it's definitely because I related to her so much. I came from the same hometown as her, San Jose, and just like her, I have no desire to return to San Jose. Just like her, I have also grown up to be a woman who is successful on paper. I've had an accomplished career. I am financially stable now at this point in my life. I have a loving partner. Even though my life on paper is perfect, I still struggle so much with just being a normal fucking human being. I really related to her not being close to her family either, especially when she talks about what she would do on the holidays, because on the holidays, all your friends are going off with their families, all the restaurants are closed, and you gotta figure out what you gotta do by yourself. You really have to fend for your own self in that sense. So I think her hyper individuality and her drive for success, especially career success and financial success, as a way to kind of like fight back against all of the other bad shit that happened in her life, all of that I found so relatable. But the thing that got to me, that made me cry on the subway, was not any of the terrible things that she talked about in the book. It was towards the end of the book when she talked about finally being happy. The parts where she talks about her finally feeling happiness, and there's just like the relief of it. After you've been through so much shit, I felt the relief along with her, and that's why I cried on the subway and even in this video. Anyway, I feel like I can't properly articulate how impactful this book was for me, so I'm just gonna go ahead and read the quotes from her. Trauma isn't just the sadness that comes from being beaten or neglected or insulted. That's just one layer of it. Trauma also is mourning the childhood you could have had, the childhood other kids around you had. The fact that you could have had a mom who hugged and kissed when you skinned your knee, or a dad who stayed and brought you a bouquet of flowers at your graduation. Trauma is mourning the fact that as an adult, you have to parent yourself. You have to stand in your kitchen, starving, near tears, next to a burnt chicken, and you can't call your mom to tell her about it, to listen to her tell you that it's okay, to ask if you can come over for some of her cooking. Instead, you have to pull up your bootstraps and solve the painful puzzle of your life by yourself. What other choice do you have? Nobody else is going to solve it for you. And another quote that I felt was very reflective of my mentality was, no matter what I do, no matter where I try to find joy, I instead find my trauma, and it whispers to me, you will always be this way. It's never going to change. I will follow you. I will make you miserable forever, and then I will kill you. Her writing is just so searing and impactful. I feel like it just cuts, and I don't know if it's just because I relate to it so deeply, but I feel like it's just so brutally honest with what a person can experience when they have these mental conditions. Man, when she gets to the part about her finally being happy, I feel like that was what broke me. And that's why it will be my top book of the year and probably one of my top books of all time. So yeah, anyway, now I'm broken and my juice box is empty, and I'll see you next time for maybe a lighter video to watch. It'll be my worst books of 2022. Go ahead and unsubscribe, and goodbye.
Got you on my mind. I don't know how to cope this, because it's Christmas time.